drawing piece. Sorry. Okay, so then we have lipids, or fats, cholesterol, waxes, which don't really apply to us, but they definitely apply to plants and other things that have water run off them. Okay, so...
Well, I mean, we got earwax, so good.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe look at that.
Earwax, that's a good one. I mean, you know that, like, it does repel water. Okay, so we have fats, cholesterol, waxes, or lipids. The other term that you said earlier was oils. These are storage molecules. Okay, so when we have a whole bunch of sugar that we weren't able to make into glycogen and store in our muscles, we will convert it to a lipid. So they also are built out of C's, O's, and H's. So carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens. So if you were going to run the Iditarod or something like that up in the tundra, they pack almost like a butter-like substance for their huskies and wolves that pull their sleds. So it is a very energy-dense molecule. So we make it so that we can use it later, right? So fat is, and it also can repel water. So we will see in a little bit why this is super, super important, because lipids are essential for making up our cell membranes. So you can't even have just a single cell that's isolated as a unit with a barrier if you don't have lipids. So you really need something that doesn't interact with water, or we would just kind of like diffuse into the world around us. So we want something that doesn't get along with water. Okay, so do you guys know what the sciencey term for, like, we had carbohydrates, and then it's like almost a reversal of that word, but do you know what fossil fuels are called? Like petroleum oil, yeah, like...
oil.
Okay, so fossil fuels, like...
Gasoline.
Yeah, gasoline and petroleum oil, like underneath the earth, you know, or buried underneath an ocean for a really, really long time. That kind of oil, like crude oil, I guess is what it's called. But fossil fuels can also be called hydrocarbons. So we had carbohydrates, and then fossil fuels are hydrocarbons. So again, it just comes back to the fact that they are carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens. So we can burn them and fuel ourselves, or we can burn them and release a whole bunch of, make our engines turn in our cars, right? So we can use these to get work done, is what I'm saying.
Another good fossil fuel, coal.
Yes, so coal, I don't know if it's a good one, but I mean, it's a good example. Okay, so then what you just said can be found in beef fat. What are some other examples? You mentioned oils, like vegetable oils, so walnut oil, avocado oil. Those are called unsaturated fats. So all your oils that are liquid at room temperature, like cod liver oil and something like that.
I've always heard them as fish oils, like when you eat certain fish, they've got
like omega-3s and stuff like that.
Fatty acids and
so those are good. 3s, 6s, and 9s. So you have a lot of omega acids. But you need them in proper combination for it to be a good thing for our health. Okay, so flaxseed oil, walnut oil, avocado oil would all also have these. So if you were vegan or something, you wouldn't have to eat the fish, but they're good for us. Okay, so those are unsaturated fatty acids. Beef fat would be a saturated fatty acid. So bacon grease, straight up lard from, it could be from a pig or cow or anything. Could be the lard. But it's solid at room temperature, right? So the non-fatty part of the bacon is protein. So we're talking just exclusively about the fat. Yeah, so the grease in the pan. Right. Right. So that's how you know it is saturated. So these examples that are solid at room temperature are saturated fats. And then if they're unsaturated fats, they will be liquid at room temperature. And those are all the vegetable oils, that canola oil, vegetable oil, avocado oil, olive oil. They are loose. And we are going to try and convey the basic structures of a fat. So we'll draw long chains of carbons. And we know that carbon hopefully wants to make 4 bonds. So we have a special group down at one end. So this end is called a carboxyl group. And then this end is a methyl group. And then we draw in all of our hydrogens. And these are mostly for just recognition, like if you can pull out the functional group and recognize long carbon chain, carboxyl group, methyl group, you have a fatty acid. So this happens to be a saturated fatty acid or a saturated fat. Okay? What is it saturated with? Hydrogens. Like you said it super quietly. So it is saturated with hydrogens. So it changes the behavior of the molecule. So I drew it straight, and it actually is physically straight. So when it has all of the hydrogens that it could have, it is a flatter, straighter molecule. And that is why they are solid at room temperature, is because they can lay on top of each other like bricks. So they just kind of stack, and they can line up and make a wall of fat. And so that's why they are solid at room temperature, because they just lay so nicely together. Is that good? So saturated fats would be that bacon fat, the bacon grease, beef fat, lard, butter. Butter wasn't listed, but butter's a good one. Okay, so we're gonna draw another carbon chain, and we're still gonna call it a fat. So we're still gonna have this classic methyl and carboxyl group. So those are the same. But now I'm going to put a double bond in. Okay, so I didn't make my carbon chain very long, but that's kind of irrelevant. But now this carbon can only handle one more bond because it has 1, 2, 3. So I can only put one more hydrogen off of it. This has 1, 2, 3. So I can only put one more hydrogen off of it. This one's still good. I can put 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's no longer saturated with hydrogens. You can notice the void there that it creates. And this double bond creates a kink. So no longer can they lay on top of each other. If you tried to stack these, they would all just be a bunch of, I'm like kinky molecules, but yeah, it's my funny, not your funny probably. But that makes them not solid at room temperature or liquid at room temperature, however you want to phrase that in your head. But this is unsaturated. Saturated. Sorry. Unsaturated fat. And so those would be all of the ones that were liquid at room temperature. So there are some weird ones out there, like coconut oil is like a medium chain fatty acid. And so we don't really know how to categorize it. Is it saturated, unsaturated? It's solid at room temperature, but you know, it behaves differently in our body than other saturated fats like butter. So there are some tricky ones, but for the most part, it's kind of easy to call because it can only handle 4 bonds total, and this double bond here makes it 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's maxed out. It can't have another hydrogen. So the double bond is what puts unsaturated with hydrogen into understand why the bonds or the bonding potential exists, go back to atomic structure and the octet rule. So hopefully that will make sense. Okay, so you can have those two structures, and then we get to the point where I'm like beyond my drawing skills. So we want to go back to the internet. The big ones, triglyceride structures. Okay, so you have the methyl group, methyl group, methyl group. The carboxyl group actually here gave up an H so that it could bond. But you'll see it did have a carboxyl group, or hopefully you can kind of recognize that. And then it has a glycerol backbone, but it's 3 fatty acid chains. How many of the 3 are saturated in this example? 2 saturated fatty acid chains and 1 unsaturated fat. Yeah, so because you only have one that has a kink in it, and it's down here with the double bond. So a triglyceride structure, it is 3 fatty acid chains off of a glycerol backbone. Here they are showing the carboxyl group and how it forms, and it's called dehydration synthesis, but a water molecule is removed to glue these together. So here you get your molecule N3. So that's a triglyceride. And then another one that's kind of hard to draw is cholesterol. But cholesterols are super, super neat. So what are those rings made out of, and how are they different than looking at a sugar? Oh, yeah, so like the house one?
Yeah.
So that's a little different because we haven't had that. It bent at a different angle when it was fructose. But what are all of these? They are carbons. So these are carbon rings, so we can try and find ones that, get back here, I'm like, will they ever show it? They really don't have any that drew the carbon rings. Huh. Well, that's very interesting. Here, they show them as carbon, so yeah, it's just interesting that they don't really, here's one. And it does color code the carbons down here, so it varies on which model kit you use, whether the oxygen is red or the carbon is red. But here, carbon rings in black. So that is neat. This structure is carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens. They do not have as many OHs hanging off of them, so they do not get along with water. And what's missing from their ring that's different than what was in the sugar, in each and every sugar ring that we had? Yeah, so there's no oxygen in the ring itself. So that is what's missing. It is only carbons in that ring. So in all of the sugars, you had an oxygen that kind of looked like a diamond in a ring of carbons. But this one, it's just carbons, so they don't have as much affinity for water, or none at all. So cholesterol will repel water and won't get along with water. And we can go to another difficult one to draw, but we'll kind of show it here. So here is a phospholipid. So I want to show this because you have the phospholipid bilayer. So all of these phospholipids are what is responsible for making up our cell membrane, and we'll go into more detail later. But there's many ways to look at it. But these are fatty acid chains. So sometimes they can draw it out with the actual chemical structures, or you can look at it and have the molecular structure there, or sometimes they just draw it as like a zigzaggy line hairpin off the top. So the important thing to remember is that this polar head gets along with water, so it faces outwards, and then the fatty acid tails face inward. So these are going to be primarily lipid, and when it forms our cell membrane, the impenetrable part is that hydrophobic layer, or the layer that doesn't get along with water. So the hydrophilic head points outwards to the watery space outside of our cell, or the watery space inside of our cell, and that makes a barrier like this. So it's super, super neat. And why that's important is that what can't pass through is water-loving molecules like sugar or salt or things like that. But what can pass through are those lipids. So I want to look at testosterone structure, and you'll see kind of an amazing relationship, because what does that look like? Cholesterol, right? Like it looks almost like it's like a cholesterol root. And so when you take sex hormones, they will pass right through your cells. Does that make sense? So the phospholipid bilayer is what creates our membrane, our barrier to the outside world, keeping some things in our cell and some things out of our cell. But the thing that can pass through are things like hormones. So when you look at testosterone, estrogen, they're very similar. Oh, that's interesting. But you'll see, like, they're all cholesterol based, but they can pass right through your cell. So, they do have like birth control in patches, and they do have testosterone in gel patches. But you have to be very careful, because if it can pass through the patient's arm into their system, it can pass through your skin into your system. So same thing with gasoline and the other petroleum products that we were talking about earlier, all the fossil fuels. It can pass right through your skin. So if you're using any cleaning products that are oil-based, like Goo Gone, it can pass through your cell membrane and kind of mess things up. So wear gloves. And that's why when you get gas on your hands at the gas station, why washing your hands doesn't seem to matter. That gas stink is like there for so long, is it absorbed into your skin. So again, you probably want to wear gloves to deal with those things. So it's very fascinating. So we do use it as a barrier to keep our cell membranes intact, like some kind of barrier, but lipids can pass through, which to me I find very interesting. It does create some interesting ecological problems too, because I don't think we realize, like, you put sex hormones into your system. Like, imagine all the females that are on birth control, and then they pee out a lot of those hormones into our water systems, but anything that's exposed to that hormone, and it's picking it up through its skin, so fish, aquatic life, all is exposed to that hormone load. I don't know, it's mind-blowingly fascinating to me, like things that we did not foresee as consequences. We're just treating the patient, but we don't really have a system for dealing with the whole. So it's kind of neat. Okay, so that was